When Olivia Carter walked into her classroom at Westridge High School, no one could have imagined they were looking at a woman who had been trained to neutralize threats in 9 different ways using only a ballpoint pen. The morning bell that would soon ring across the quiet suburban campus would be followed by events that would force her to reveal skills she had spent 5 years burying beneath cardigans and lesson plans. But that moment was still hours away. And for now, she was just another dedicated English teacher that everyone assumed had never seen anything more threatening than a strongly worded parent email. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in room 217 as Olivia arranged the poetry anthologies on each desk with methodical precision. At 32, she moved with an economy of motion that suggested careful consideration of every action, though her colleagues attributed this to her organized nature rather than the tactical awareness it actually represented. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her clothes were the standard professional attire that made every teacher look approachable and unremarkable. "Great, they gave us the new teacher for the faculty meeting presentation again," muttered David Reynolds, a tenured history teacher who had been lecturing on the Civil War from the same yellowed notes for 15 years. He glanced at Olivia as she calibrated the projector, shaking his head with barely concealed irritation. "Hope you're better prepared than last month. We can't afford another rambling presentation about creative writing techniques." Olivia didn't respond to the jab, instead focusing on checking the screen resolution and ensuring all the presentation slides were properly organized. Her movements were precise and methodical, each adjustment made with the kind of familiarity that suggested she'd prepared countless briefings before, though her employment records showed she'd only been hired 2 years ago with minimal experience in education. Catherine Simmons, the department head, approached with a stack of curriculum requirements and assessment rubrics. At 45, she was older than Olivia, and carried herself with the authority of someone who believed experience was measured purely in years at the current institution. "Carter, you'll be handling the standardized test preparation overview today. Nothing complicated. Just keep the information concise and answer basic questions. Think you can manage that without going off on creative tangents?" "Yes, ma'am," Olivia replied quietly, accepting the paperwork without any sign of taking offense at the condescending tone. She'd learned that drawing attention to herself only created complications, and complications interfered with her ability to remain invisible in plain sight. The teacher's lounge buzzed with its usual morning activity as faculty members checked mailboxes before heading to their classrooms. Administrators circulated memos, and department heads reviewed quarterly reports. Westridge High wasn't a large school, but it served a diverse suburban community and maintained high academic standards that required constant attention from its dedicated staff. Mark Williams, the athletic director who'd been with the school for 7 years, stopped by Olivia's desk to pick up the eligibility forms for his basketball players. "Still getting used to the bureaucracy?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd already made up his mind about her capabilities. "Education administration isn't as straightforward as it looks. Lots of moving parts, tight deadlines, parents and students depending on accurate information." Olivia handed him the completed forms, her expression remaining calm and professional. "Your point guard's grades improved significantly in the last quarter." His essay on Steinbeck showed remarkable insight. "You might want to encourage his college application to include his analytical writing skills alongside his athletic achievements." Williams looked surprised by the specificity of her information. Most newer teachers stuck to generic comments about student performance without offering substantive insights or strategic recommendations. "How closely have you been monitoring his progress?" "That's unusually detailed feedback." "I checked all your athletes' performance data," Olivia explained simply. "Seemed relevant to their eligibility and future opportunities." Huh, good thinking, I guess. Williams took the forms and headed toward the gym, though he glanced back at Olivia with a mixture of surprise and lingering skepticism. New teachers rarely showed that kind of initiative with student data, and her attention to detail didn't match the narrative that the administration had constructed about her limited experience. The morning progressed with its typical rhythm of bell schedules, classroom management, and student engagement that kept the educational machine running. Olivia handled her assigned classes with quiet efficiency, guiding discussions, evaluating student work, and maintaining behavioral standards with the kind of systematic approach that suggested familiarity with protocols that went beyond basic teacher training. "Carter," called out Rebecca Chun, another English teacher who'd been watching Olivia's classroom management with growing curiosity. "That discussion technique you used with the reluctant participants probably saved us 20 minutes today. How'd you figure out that the seating arrangement would improve participation rates?" Olivia looked up from the essays she was evaluating, her expression unchanged. "Experience with group dynamics, I suppose." "What kind of experience?" Chun pressed. "Your resume said you were mostly in curriculum development before this position." "Different kinds of curriculum development," Olivia replied, returning her attention to the essays. The truth was that she'd spent years designing communication protocols under circumstances that made classroom management seem straightforward by comparison. But explaining that would require revealing information she'd spent 5 years trying to keep buried. David Reynolds had been listening to the conversation while reviewing lecture notes, snorted with derision. "Probably learned it from those teacher education videos or something. These days, people think they're experts after watching a few tutorials online." Olivia continued her work without responding to the dismissive comment. She'd encountered skepticism before, and she knew that arguing or defending herself would only draw more attention to inconsistencies in her background that she preferred to keep unexplored. Better to let people make their assumptions and focus on doing the job competently enough to avoid scrutiny. The school's public address system delivered regular announcements about upcoming events, club meetings, and administrative reminders throughout the day. Olivia monitored these communications alongside managing her classroom, tracking multiple information streams while maintaining accurate records and ensuring that educational protocols were followed precisely. Catherine Simmons noticed Olivia's systematic approach to managing multiple responsibilities and approached her desk during the lunch period with grudging interest. "You seem comfortable with multitasking." Most new teachers struggle with keeping track of administrative requirements alongside their teaching duties. "It's not that complicated once you understand the patterns," Olivia replied. "Educational systems are pretty standardized across different institutions." "What other institutions?" Simmons asked, her curiosity piqued by the casual reference to experience that wasn't reflected in Olivia's employment file. Olivia realized she'd revealed more than intended and quickly deflected. "Just general educational frameworks. Same basic principles apply to most learning environments." Simmons studied her for a moment, clearly sensing that there was more to the story. But before she could ask follow-up questions, a student arrived with a scheduling conflict that required immediate attention and alternative arrangements. Olivia handled the situation smoothly, quickly identifying options and maintaining communication with all affected parties until the situation was resolved. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the days wore on, Olivia's competence became increasingly difficult to ignore, even for colleagues who'd initially dismissed her as inexperienced. Her classroom management was impeccable, her student engagement showed deep understanding of motivation techniques, and her crisis intervention with troubled students suggested familiarity with high-pressure situations that went beyond basic teacher training. Mark Williams returned from a regional coaching conference earlier than expected, thanks to the student performance data Olivia had provided. "That analysis you shared saved me nearly a week of eligibility reviews," he told her, setting his completed paperwork on her desk. "Where'd you learn about academic performance tracking like that?" "That wasn't beginner's luck. Just careful attention to available information," Olivia said. Though her ability to quickly synthesize multiple data, sources and make tactical decisions actually came from years of experience in environments where accurate information meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The school bell signaled class transitions as students moved through the hallways, and Olivia maintained her quiet vigil, ensuring that every learner had the support they needed and every educational objective stayed on schedule. Her colleagues had begun to notice that classes ran more smoothly when she was involved, though they attributed this to coincidence rather than the systematic expertise she brought to seemingly routine tasks. Rebecca Chun approached Olivia's classroom during a planning period, carrying coffee and wearing an expression of genuine curiosity. "Can I ask you something? You handle this job like you've been doing it for decades, but administration said you were completely new to classroom teaching. What's your actual background?" Olivia accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks, considering how much truth she could safely reveal. "Curriculum development, like I mentioned. Different environments, but similar organizational principles." "What kind of environments?" Chun pressed gently. "Because the way you manage difficult students and handle potential conflicts, it seems like you've done this kind of work before." "Government educational initiatives," Olivia said finally, offering a partial truth that might satisfy Chun's curiosity without opening doors to more dangerous questions. "Different scale, similar coordination requirements." Chun nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation, though Olivia knew that any detailed investigation of her supposed government educational experience would quickly reveal inconsistencies that she couldn't afford to have exposed. Her actual background was documented in classified files that officially listed her as having no connection to education prior to 5 years ago, and maintaining that official status was essential for reasons that went far beyond her current job in civilian education. The school day continued with its steady rhythm of classroom instruction and student management, and Olivia performed her duties with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized every job she'd held since returning to civilian life. She'd learned to be competent enough to avoid criticism, but not so exceptional that she attracted unwanted attention from people who might ask the wrong questions. But sometimes, despite careful efforts to remain invisible, circumstances had a way of revealing truths that were meant to stay hidden. The ordinary school day that proceeded with routine educational activities would soon be disrupted by events that would change everything, proving that some skills were too significant to remain buried forever, no matter how carefully someone tried to live an unremarkable life. For now, though, Olivia Carter was just another dedicated English teacher at a suburban high school, handling routine instruction and keeping young minds engaged with literature and composition. Invisible, unremarkable, and completely forgettable to anyone who didn't look closely enough to notice the precision in her movements or the depth of knowledge behind her seemingly routine decisions. 5 months into her second year at Westridge High, Olivia's unusual competence was becoming harder to ignore, even among colleagues who preferred to maintain their assumptions about her limited experience. The incident started small, but accumulated into a pattern that made even the most dismissive coworkers take notice. It began with the cafeteria confrontation. 2 seniors with a history of antagonism had escalated their verbal sparring into a physical altercation that threatened to become a full-scale brawl. Standard protocol called for immediate administrative intervention and security notification, which would have meant potential suspensions and permanent records for college-bound students. Olivia was monitoring lunch duty when the conflict erupted. Instead of following the standard disciplinary procedures that other teachers would have implemented, she began moving toward the situation with a calm purposefulness that surprised everyone within eyesight. "Miss Carter, wait for security," called Principal Martinez, reaching for his radio. Protocol requires trained personnel for physical altercations. Olivia didn't acknowledge the instruction, already positioned between the two students before they could land any significant blows. Her movements were fluid and precise as she separated the young men, without using force that could escalate the situation. "Tyler, left hand down, step back 3 paces, she instructed the taller student, her voice carrying an unmistakable authority despite its calm delivery. "Marcus, control your breathing, focus on my voice. Both of you, create distance now." The students, caught off guard by her unexpected approach and commanding presence, complied automatically. The gathered crowd of students fell silent, sensing something unusual in their English teacher's response to the situation. David Reynolds looked up from his lunch supervision position, frowning. "Carter, how did you defuse that so quickly? That's not standard conflict resolution protocol." Olivia ignored the question, continuing her intervention with the agitated students. "Tyler, I need you to proceed to the east hallway. Marcus, remain here until I give further instruction. This gives you both space to regain perspective without further escalation." "Yes, Ms. Carter." Both students responded almost in unison, their previous aggression visibly diminishing under her structured guidance. Catherine Simmons approached Olivia's position, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Carter, where exactly did you learn that de-escalation technique? We don't have that intervention model in our teacher training materials." "Experience with similar conflict patterns," Olivia replied without elaborating, then returned her attention to ensuring the situation remained controlled. What followed was a 15-minute intervention during which Olivia provided step-by-step guidance for conflict resolution that probably exceeded the expertise of most certified counselors. Her instructions were precise, methodical, and delivered with the confidence of someone who had dealt with similar volatile situations before. The procedure worked perfectly. Both students were able to articulate their positions, acknowledge their behavioral choices, and develop a sustainable resolution without administrative penalties. When Principal Martinez arrived with security personnel, he found a controlled situation where there should have been chaos. His gratitude was evident in his voice. "Miss Carter, I don't know how you managed that situation so effectively, but you just saved these young men from serious disciplinary consequences," he said. "I've been in education for 15 years. And I've never seen anyone provide conflict intervention like that without specialized training." Rebecca Chun stared at Olivia with open amazement. "Seriously, where did you learn behavioral management techniques like that?" "That was like watching a professional hostage negotiator." "Just practical experience," Olivia deflected, already turning her attention to resuming normal cafeteria supervision. "Similar principles apply to different conflict situations." "What kind of practical experience?" Chun pressed. "Because that wasn't basic knowledge. You diffused a potentially violent situation using psychological techniques that aren't in any teacher training manual." Olivia looked up briefly, her expression calm, but clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I've worked with various types of behavioral management before. Same de-escalation approaches work for different conflict scenarios." David Reynolds wasn't satisfied with the vague explanation. "Carter, that conflict resolution procedure you just demonstrated isn't something you learn from general educational experience. That's specialized tactical knowledge that takes years to develop." "Not necessarily," Olivia replied quietly. "Some people pick up behavioral management skills faster than others." The incident with the cafeteria confrontation was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Olivia's responses to various school situations revealed a depth of knowledge that couldn't be easily explained by her supposed background in general curriculum development. When a freshman experienced a severe anxiety attack during standardized testing, Olivia provided crisis intervention that went far beyond basic teacher response protocols. She seemed to have intimate knowledge of psychological first aid, physiological stress responses, and emergency stabilization procedures for acute panic symptoms. Breathe from your diaphragm, not your chest, she instructed the hyperventilating student, her voice steady and confident as she guided him through the episode. Focus on my count. 4 counts in, hold for 7, release for 8. We'll continue until your heart rate stabilizes. Miss Carter, should we call for the school nurse? Asked a concerned teaching assistant, watching the situation with growing alarm. Not necessary yet. This is an acute anxiety response that can be managed through proper breathing regulation and cognitive grounding techniques, Olivia explained with the kind of certainty that suggested professional expertise with stress responses. Continue normal testing procedures for the other students to minimize additional environmental stressors. Mark Williams, who was serving as a test proctor in the adjacent classroom, approached Olivia after the student had been successfully stabilized. How do you know so much about acute anxiety management? That's pretty specific psychological knowledge for an English teacher. Olivia continued monitoring the recovering student while answering Williams' question. I've dealt with performance anxiety in educational settings before. Some stress responses are universal regardless of the triggering context. When did you receive clinical intervention training? Williams asked, his curiosity clearly piqued. And why would an English curriculum developer need expertise in psychological first aid? Professional development workshops, Olivia replied, providing the recovered student with follow-up support instructions that successfully guided him back to testing readiness. Some educational environments require additional crisis management skills. The pattern continued with increasing frequency. Olivia demonstrated knowledge of security protocols that exceeded anything taught in standard teacher preparation. She showed familiarity with emergency response procedures that suggested specialized certification. Her crisis management skills consistently outperformed those of colleagues with decades more experience in education. When a sudden power outage plunged the school into darkness during midterm exams, Olivia immediately implemented emergency protocols that probably prevented a panic situation among hundreds of stressed students. Everyone remained seated. Place your pencils down and cover your test materials, she instructed, her voice carrying unmistakable authority across the suddenly darkened gymnasium. Faculty, establish position at all exit points and begin standard blackout protocols. Can anyone provide status on the emergency generator activation timeline? Catherine Simmons stopped her nervous adjustments to voice Olivia's sudden command presence. Carter, how do you know our emergency blackout procedures? Those aren't even covered in the general faculty handbook. Emergency response information is available through administrative databases, Olivia replied while continuing to coordinate the situation. Standard protocols exist for all school crisis scenarios. Yeah, but you knew the exact procedures without looking anything up, Simmons pointed out. You told faculty to secure exit points and check generator status like you'd managed school emergencies before. Olivia guided the examination room to a controlled, orderly state and coordinated with maintenance personnel for immediate power restoration. The efficiency of her crisis management impressed everyone who witnessed it, but it also raised questions about the source of her specialized knowledge. David Reynolds pulled up a chair next to Olivia's desk during a planning period later that week. Okay, Carter, I've been watching you handle situations for months now, and something doesn't add up. You know more about crisis management, behavioral intervention, and emergency procedures than people who've been teaching for decades. Experience transfers between different applications, Olivia said, focusing on her lesson plans to avoid making eye contact. Skills learned in one context often apply to others. What context? Reynolds pressed. Because the way you handle emergency situations suggests training that goes way beyond general curriculum development. You coordinate like someone who's managed actual crisis situations before. Olivia looked up briefly, her expression carefully neutral. Different jobs require different skill sets. I try to be thorough in whatever work I'm assigned. That's not an answer, Reynolds pointed out. Being thorough doesn't explain how you know specialized psychological techniques, security protocols, and emergency procedures that aren't taught in teacher preparation programs. Rebecca Chun joined the conversation, carrying student writing samples for a department review. Carter, I've been observing the situations you've handled over the past few months. Your success rate for crisis resolution is unprecedented for someone at your experience level. Either you're incredibly lucky, or you have a background that isn't reflected in your employment file. Olivia accepted the writing samples and began reviewing them methodically, her expression remaining calm despite the increasing scrutiny. Sometimes problem-solving skills develop naturally through exposure to different challenges. Natural development doesn't explain tactical expertise, Chun countered. The anxiety intervention you guided last week required specific knowledge that takes formal training or extensive hands-on experience to acquire. The questions were becoming more persistent and more difficult to deflect without revealing information that Olivia couldn't afford to have exposed. Her strategy of remaining invisible was becoming complicated by competence that exceeded her cover story's limitations. Mark Williams returned from basketball practice and overheard the ongoing conversation about Olivia's qualifications. You know what I think? I think Carter's overqualified for this job, but can't or won't talk about why. Nobody learns this stuff from general curriculum development. So what do you think she really did before this? Simmons asked, clearly interested in Williams' theory. Williams studied Olivia's focused attention to her work, noting the precision of her movements and the systematic approach she brought to every task. Military maybe, or some kind of specialized government work. The way she handles crisis situations and behavioral problems suggests training that goes beyond educational applications. Olivia's hands paused momentarily in their methodical organization of student essays, a reaction so brief that only the most observant colleague might have noticed. But that momentary pause suggested that William's speculation had come uncomfortably close to truths that needed to remain hidden. Government work covers a lot of different positions, she said carefully, resuming her systematic assessment of student writing. Educational roles exist in many different contexts. The deflection was skillful, but not entirely convincing. And Olivia knew that continued success in crisis situations would only generate more questions about qualifications that she couldn't fully explain without compromising the carefully constructed anonymity that kept her safe. The revelation came on a Thursday morning during what should have been a routine fire drill. Olivia was leading her sophomore literature class through The Great Gatsby when the alarm sounded, its piercing wail cutting through classroom discussions across campus. Students began their practiced movements toward the door, while Olivia scanned the hallway with a quick, professional assessment that went unnoticed by her chattering charges. Something in her posture shifted imperceptibly as she noticed 3 men entering the building through the north entrance, men wearing maintenance uniforms that didn't match the school's contracted service providers. "Change of plan," Olivia announced, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. "We're going to use the eastern exit instead of our assigned route. Move quickly, stay together." "But Miss Carter," protested Emma Reeves, class president and stickler for procedures, "the drill protocol says we're supposed to use the west stairwell for our section." "Protocols change when circumstances require adaptation," Olivia replied without elaboration, already guiding her confused students toward a different exit path than the one practiced during every previous drill. As they moved through the corridor, David Reynolds stepped out of his classroom with his own students, frowning at Olivia's deviation from standard procedures. "Carter, what are you doing? This isn't our designated evacuation route." Olivia paused only briefly, keeping her students moving while addressing her colleague. "There are 3 individuals in maintenance uniforms entering through the north entrance. They're carrying concealed weapons beneath their jackets. This isn't a fire drill, David. Get your students out through the theater exit immediately." Reynolds stared at her, shock replacing his usual skepticism. How could you possibly know? No time. Move your students now. Alert any other faculty you encounter to divert to alternative exits. Olivia's voice carried an unmistakable command presence that brooked no argument. Keep everyone away from the main hallway and administrative offices. Without waiting for further discussion, Olivia continued guiding her students through the eastern corridor, her movements displaying an urgency that communicated the seriousness of the situation without causing panic. She positioned herself between her students and the main hallway, her body language shifting subtly into a protective stance that none of her charges recognized but that spoke volumes to the increasingly pale-faced Reynolds. As they approached the eastern exit, Olivia addressed her class with calm precision. Once outside, continue directly to the far side of the athletic field. Remain together as a group. Emma, you're responsible for keeping everyone information and taking attendance when you reach the designated point. Miss Carter, what's happening? Emma asked, sensing the tension beneath her teacher's composed exterior. Is this part of the drill? Consider it an enhanced safety exercise, Olivia replied, carefully monitoring the movements of other classes now streaming toward various exits. Your responsibility is to ensure your classmates remain calm and follow directions precisely. As her students moved through the exit doors into the bright morning sunlight, Olivia remained at the threshold, watching as other classes evacuated through their designated routes. She caught sight of Catherine Simmons guiding her senior AP class toward the main assembly point, directly in the path that would intersect with the armed intruders' probable movement pattern. Without hesitation, Olivia moved toward them, intercepting Simmons before her group could proceed further. Catherine, redirect to the south field immediately. Do not use the main assembly point. What are you talking about? Simmons demanded, clearly annoyed by the interruption to her orderly evacuation. We always assemble on the front lawn for accountability checks. Not today, Olivia stated firmly. There are armed individuals in the building. Move your students to the athletic field now. Simmons' expression shifted from irritation to alarm. Armed? How could you possibly? There's no time for explanations. Move your students now. Olivia's tone left no room for argument, and something in her expression convinced the senior teacher to comply without further questions. As Simmons redirected her class, Olivia continued moving against the flow of evacuating students, scanning each departing group to ensure they were moving away from potential danger. She caught sight of Principal Martinez near the administration wing, preparing to use his master key to check classrooms for remaining students, standard protocol during evacuation procedures. Principal Martinez, Olivia called, approaching him with purposeful strides. Lock down the admin wing immediately. We have armed intruders in the building, moving toward the main office. Martinez turned, confusion evident on his face. Armed intruders? The alarm was triggered for a fire drill. There's no indication of any security breach. 3 men entered through the north entrance 2 minutes ago, Olivia explained rapidly. Non-standard maintenance uniforms, tactical movement patterns, concealed weapons under their jackets. They're heading toward the administrative offices, likely targeting the secure areas. How could you possibly know? Martinez began, but Olivia cut him off. You need to trust me right now. Lock down the office wing, contact law enforcement with a code red alert, and get yourself to safety. I'll ensure the remaining students are evacuated. Something in her voice, the absolute certainty and command authority that had never been present in their previous interactions, made Martinez hesitate only briefly before nodding and moving toward the secure door controls for the administrative section. As the principal hurried away, Olivia continued her systematic sweep of the evacuation routes, ensuring that all students were moving away from the building. The practiced calm she had maintained for her students' benefit gave way to a focused intensity that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who knew her only as the mild-mannered English teacher. Her attention shifted as she caught movement at the far end of the main corridor. The three men in maintenance uniforms had reached the central hub of the school and were now moving with obvious purpose toward the administrative offices where student records, personnel files, and the school's financial information were stored. Olivia assessed the situation with a rapid tactical evaluation that drew on training she had hoped never to use again. The intruders were armed, moving with coordination that suggested professional training, and clearly had specific objectives within the school. With most students safely evacuating and law enforcement likely still minutes away, she made a decision that would irreversibly change her carefully constructed civilian identity. Moving through the empty hallways with a completely different demeanor than her students had ever witnessed, Olivia positioned herself at a vantage point that allowed observation of the intruders while providing tactical cover. She removed her phone and rapidly typed a message to Rebecca Chun, who she had seen coordinating evacuation near the gymnasium. Alert police, 3 armed intruders targeting admin wing. Students evacuating. Maintain perimeter security until authorities arrive. The men had reached the secured door to the administrative offices and were examining the electronic lock system. Their movements confirmed Olivia's initial assessment. These weren't opportunistic criminals but trained operatives with specific objectives. The leader produced a device designed to override the electronic security system, indicating a level of preparation and equipment that suggested a planned operation rather than an impulsive act. Olivia weighed her options, knowing that direct intervention would expose capabilities she had spent years concealing. But as the security door began to yield to the electronic bypass, she recognized that the threat to school personnel and sensitive information outweighed her personal security concerns. Moving with fluid precision that bore no resemblance to her usual careful teacher's demeanor, Olivia approached the first intruder from behind. Her movements were silent and measured, closing the distance with tactical efficiency that would have immediately identified her to any trained observer as someone with extensive combat experience. The first man had no opportunity to react before Olivia's precisely delivered strike rendered him unconscious. His collapse alerted his companions, who turned with practiced coordination, weapons now drawn and focused on the unexpected threat. "Teacher," the leader identified, his voice carrying surprise as he assessed the seemingly harmless woman who had somehow neutralized his teammate. "Walk away now and you won't be harmed." "That's not how this works," Olivia replied, her voice completely transformed from the gentle classroom tone her students knew. "You've entered a school with weapons and hostile intent. Your operation ends here." The second man lunged forward, attempting to subdue what he perceived as a misguided civilian. His attack met a response that defied all his expectations as Olivia redirected his momentum with expert precision, using his own body weight against him in a maneuver that spoke to years of advanced combat training. The leader, recognizing too late that they faced someone with professional capabilities, attempted to bring his weapon to bear. Olivia's response was immediate and decisive, a combination of movements that disarmed him before he could fire, followed by a precisely delivered strike that incapacitated without killing. In less than 30 seconds, all 3 intruders were neutralized, their weapons secured and their unconscious forms positioned for law enforcement restraint. Olivia moved systematically through their equipment, identifying communications devices and tools that confirmed her assessment of a coordinated operation with specific intelligence objectives. The sound of approaching sirens filled the now empty hallways as Olivia completed her security assessment. She knew that the moment police entered the building, the carefully constructed identity she had maintained for 5 years would begin to unravel. There would be questions about her capabilities, investigation into her background, and inevitable discovery of the truth she had been hiding. For a brief moment, she considered simply walking away, disappearing into the evacuation crowds, and establishing a new identity elsewhere before the connections could be made. But as she heard Principal Martinez's voice directing first responders to the scene, she recognized that running would only postpone the inevitable while potentially endangering others who had come to matter to her. The decision was made in that moment of clarity. Olivia Carter, high school English teacher, would face the consequences of revealing her true capabilities. Whatever came next, she would handle it with the same precision and commitment that had defined her previous life and the one she had built among these students and colleagues. As tactical officers entered the hallway with weapons drawn, Olivia raised her hands in the universal gesture of compliance. "Situation contained," she called out with professional calm. 3 subjects neutralized, weapons secured. No active threat remains. The lead officer's expression shifted from focused intensity to confusion as he took in the scene. 3 incapacitated men and a slender woman in teacher's clothing, standing calmly amid what should have been a hostile engagement. "Ma'am, I need you to move away from the suspects and identify yourself," he instructed, maintaining his professional protocol despite his evident surprise. "Olivia Carter, English Department, Westridge High School," she replied, complying with his directions while maintaining her composed demeanor. These individuals entered the building during evacuation procedures, armed and targeting the administrative offices. I intercepted them before they could access secured areas. "You intercepted them," the officer repeated, taking in the 3 unconscious men and their secured weapons. "Ma'am, I'm going to need a more detailed explanation of exactly how you managed this situation." Olivia nodded, understanding that the moment of truth had arrived. "I have specialized training from previous employment. I recognized the threat pattern and responded according to my capabilities." As additional officers secured the scene and began processing the intruders, the tactical team leader continued his assessment of Olivia with growing professional recognition. "What kind of previous employment provides capabilities to neutralize 3 armed subjects without assistance?" Before Olivia could respond, Principal Martinez approached, his expression a mixture of relief and profound confusion. "Miss Carter, the students are all safely evacuated, but what happened here? How did you?" His question trailed off as he surveyed the scene. "I believe Miss Carter has some explaining to do," the tactical officer observed. This level of response capability suggests background that would be unusual for a high school teacher. Olivia met their questioning gazes with calm resignation. "You're correct. My background isn't what appears in my employment records. I'll provide full disclosure to the appropriate authorities, but I'd suggest completing the security sweep and ensuring all students are accounted for before we begin that conversation." The professional assessment in her voice was unmistakable, and both the principal and the tactical officer found themselves nodding in agreement before fully processing the subtle shift in authority that had occurred. Somehow, this English teacher was now directing their security response with a command presence that demanded respect. As the building was secured and students were accounted for at the evacuation points, Olivia was escorted to the school conference room where local law enforcement, district administration, and emerging federal authorities began to gather. Her colleagues watched with growing curiosity as she was treated with increasing deference by the tactical response team, a stark contrast to her usual quiet presence in faculty meetings. David Reynolds approached Rebecca Chun as they monitored their students on the athletic field, his expression troubled. "Did you see Carter take down those men?" "Because I caught a glimpse through the East Corridor windows, and what I saw wasn't anything they teach in teacher certification programs." Chun nodded slowly, processing her own observations. She moved like someone with military training, professional combat skills. The officers are treating her differently than I would expect for a civilian witness. "I told you there was more to her background than curriculum development." Mark Williams joined them, keeping his voice low to avoid student attention. The way she identified those armed men before anyone else even knew there was a threat. That's not just good observation skills. That's threat assessment training. Catherine Simmons completed their impromptu faculty gathering, her typical skepticism replaced by thoughtful consideration. She saved lives today. Whatever her background actually is, she used it to protect our students when she could have simply evacuated with everyone else. Inside the conference room, Olivia sat calmly as law enforcement officials processed the initial evidence and began constructing their understanding of what had occurred. The tactical team leader, now identified as Sergeant James Morales, returned from his communication with dispatch, his expression indicating new information. "Miss Carter," he began carefully, "we've run your identification through our system, and there appear to be some flags on your file that have triggered notifications to federal agencies. Would you care to explain that before their representatives arrive?" Olivia met his questioning gaze with composed acceptance. "My name is Olivia Carter now, and I am an English teacher at Westridge High School. Before that, I served with a special operations unit under a different identity. My previous service record is classified at levels that would explain the flags in your system." Principal Martinez stared at her with growing realization. "You're military? Special forces?" "I was," Olivia corrected gently. "My service ended 5 years ago under circumstances that required a complete identity change and separation from my previous life. The skills you saw deployed today were developed during that service." "Why the cover as a teacher?" Sergeant Morales asked, professional curiosity evident in his tone. "Most former special operators go into security work or contracting." Olivia considered her response carefully. "I wanted to build rather than continue to destroy. Teaching offered an opportunity to shape future generations positively, rather than continuing in roles defined by conflict and tactical objectives." Before further questions could be pursued, the conference room door opened to admit a woman in a crisp business suit whose bearing immediately identified her as federal law enforcement. She surveyed the room briefly before her gaze settled on Olivia with flash of recognition. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," she stated, using a name Olivia hadn't heard in 5 years. "I thought you were dead." The silence that fell across the room was profound as local law enforcement and school administrators processed this new development. Olivia, or Captain Mitchell, as she had just been identified, maintained her composed demeanor despite the revelation. "Officially, I still am," she replied calmly. That status was supposed to remain intact for everyone's protection. The federal agent approached, extending her credentials for inspection. "Special Agent Diane Foster, FBI Counterterrorism Division. I need the room cleared of all personnel without appropriate security clearance. This conversation is now classified." As local officers and school administrators were escorted from the conference room, Olivia prepared herself for the inevitable dismantling of the life she had carefully constructed. 5 years of anonymity had ended in 30 seconds of necessary action, revealing capabilities that could never be explained by her cover identity. The door closed, leaving Olivia alone with Agent Foster, who studied her with a mixture of professional assessment and personal curiosity. 5 years off the grid, living as a high school English teacher. That's quite a transition from commanding one of the most elite counterterrorism units in military history. "Literature has fewer casualties than combat operations," Olivia replied simply, though apparently not complete immunity from threat scenarios. Foster's expression softened slightly. "Your actions today saved lives and protected sensitive information. Preliminary assessment suggests these operators were targeting student data for human trafficking networks. Without your intervention, they would have acquired information on hundreds of minors." The authority validation came in the form of Major General Robert Harrington, who arrived at Westridge High School at 1600 hours, exactly 7 hours after Olivia had neutralized the armed intruders. His arrival was unannounced, But the way the FBI agents immediately deferred to his presence suggested a command hierarchy that extended well beyond local jurisdiction. Olivia was debriefing with Agent Foster when the door opened to admit the general, a man she had last seen 5 years earlier during a classified ceremony where her death had been officially recorded in military files. "Captain Mitchell," General Harrington said quietly, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to commanding elite units. "You're looking remarkably alive for someone whose memorial service I attended." Olivia rose to her feet automatically, military bearing replacing her teacher's posture. "General Harrington, I didn't expect this situation to warrant your personal attention." The general took the seat across from her, dismissing the other personnel with a subtle gesture. "When one of my supposedly deceased special operators neutralizes 3 members of the Nexus criminal network in a suburban high school, it tends to get my attention." The mention of the Nexus network hit Olivia like a physical blow. "Nexus? The men who entered the school were Nexus operatives?" "Tier 2 assets, based on preliminary identification," Harrington confirmed. "Professional enough to breach standard security, not valuable enough to be carrying identification that would compromise the network. But their tactical equipment and communication devices match Nexus protocols." Olivia processed this information with growing concern. Nexus has never operated domestically. Their focus has always been international intelligence acquisition and black market weapons distribution. "Their focus is expanding," the general replied grimly. "Intelligence suggests they've developed a new revenue stream involving data acquisition for human trafficking networks. Student records provide ideal targeting information: home addresses, family details, daily routines, medical histories." "They were after our student database," Olivia realized, the tactical purpose of the operation suddenly clear. "Comprehensive profiles on over 2,000 minors, including children of government officials, military personnel, and corporate executives who live in this district." "Precisely," Harrington confirmed. "The value of that data to international trafficking operations would be incalculable. Your intervention prevented what could have become one of the most significant domestic security breaches of the decade." Olivia's teacher identity and military training merged in that moment, her commitment to protecting her students now informed by tactical understanding of the threat they had faced. The school's security protocols aren't designed to counter this level of professional infiltration. If Nexus targeted this facility, other schools are equally vulnerable. "That assessment has already been escalated to Homeland Security," the general agreed. "Emergency security reviews are being implemented across educational institutions in high-value districts." Olivia was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what had occurred. Finally, she addressed the question that had been forming since she recognized the general's arrival. "Sir, with respect, you didn't come here just to tell me about Nexus operations. What happens now?" Harrington studied her with the careful assessment of a commander evaluating a valued asset. "That depends largely on you, Captain. Your cover is irrevocably compromised. Your capabilities have been witnessed by civilians. Your identity has been flagged in federal databases. The life you've built here is no longer sustainable." The weight of those words settled over Olivia like a physical presence. 5 years of carefully constructed anonymity had been shattered in 30 seconds of necessary action. The connection she had formed, the purpose she had found in teaching, the life she had built away from violence and tactical objectives, all of it was now collapsing around her. "What are my options?" she asked, her voice reflecting the disciplined control that had defined her military career. "Option 1 is standard protocol for compromised deep cover assets," Harrington explained. "Complete extraction, new identity formation, relocation to a different region with no connections to your current life." Olivia nodded, having expected this approach. It was the same process that had brought her to Westridge 5 years earlier. "And option 2? "We've been monitoring your work here," the general continued, surprising her with this revelation. Your effectiveness in educational settings, your impact on student outcomes, your ability to implement tactical thinking in civilian contexts. These skills could be valuable in ways that don't require complete identity suppression. What kind of role are you suggesting? Olivia asked, cautious interest replacing her resignation. Training position with the National School Security Initiative, Harrington replied. Teaching defensive protocols and threat assessment to educational professionals across the country. The position would allow you to continue your educational work while acknowledging your specialized background. No more hiding who you are or what you're capable of. Olivia considered this unexpected alternative, weighing it against the complete separation from her current life that had seemed inevitable moments earlier. Would I be able to maintain any connection to Westridge? To the students I've been teaching? Limited initial contact would be possible, transitioning to normal professional relationships after the immediate situation is resolved, the general confirmed. Your security clearance would be reactivated, your service record partially declassified, and your current identity officially linked to your military background. You would exist in both worlds rather than having to abandon one for the other. As Olivia processed this possibility, the door opened to admit Principal Martinez, whose expression reflected the profound confusion of someone attempting to reconcile completely contradictory understandings of a person he thought he knew. Miss Carter, he began, then hesitated, clearly uncertain of how to address her. Or, Captain Mitchell? The FBI agents said I could speak with you briefly before they continue their investigation. Olivia is fine, Principal Martinez, she replied calmly. I recognize this situation is confusing. What can I help clarify? Martinez took a seat, nodding respectfully to General Harrington before focusing on his English teacher with new eyes. The officer said you prevented a major security breach, that the men who entered our school were after student information for some kind of trafficking operation. That appears to be the case, Olivia confirmed. They were targeting the administrative databases for information that could be used to identify vulnerable students. And you stopped them. Using skills that clearly aren't part of standard teacher certification, Martinez continued, struggling to reconcile the quiet English teacher with the tactical operator who had neutralized 3 armed threats without assistance. The officer said you have some kind of military background that's classified. Olivia glanced at General Harrington, who nodded his permission for limited disclosure. I served with a special operations unit before coming to Westridge. My background was concealed for security reasons when I transitioned to civilian life. Special operations, Martinez repeated slowly. And all this time you've been teaching Fitzgerald and Hemingway to teenagers. Literature provides powerful insights into human nature and ethical decision-making, Olivia replied with genuine conviction. Teaching has been meaningful work, not just a cover identity. Martinez seemed to process this, his educator's perspective helping him find connections that might elude others. Is that why your students show such unusual improvement in critical thinking assessments? You've been applying military strategic analysis to literary instruction. The observation was surprisingly insightful, and Olivia nodded with appreciation for his understanding. Tactical assessment and literary analysis share certain cognitive frameworks. Identifying key information, recognizing patterns, evaluating multiple perspectives, developing response strategies. These skills are valuable across different applications. Outside the conference room, Olivia's colleagues had gathered, attempting to make sense of the events that had transformed their ordinary Thursday into something that defied their understanding of their quiet English teacher. David Reynolds, whose dismissive attitude had shifted to profound respect, was attempting to process what he had witnessed. I saw her take down 3 armed men without hesitation, he told the gathered faculty members. Movements I've only seen in military training videos. And now there's a general in the conference room talking to her like she's someone important. Rebecca Chen had been organizing student support services while processing her own reactions to the day's revelations. I looked up the names I overheard from the federal agents. Captain Sarah Mitchell was a special operations commander who supposedly died during a classified mission 5 years ago. There are redacted citations for valor and leadership that mention her unit preventing major terrorist activities. So our new English teacher is actually a decorated Special Forces officer who's been hiding under a false identity. Mark Williams summarized. His earlier suspicions about Olivia's background confirmed in ways even he hadn't anticipated. And she's been using those same analytical skills to improve student writing and classroom management. Catherine Simmons, who had initially been the most skeptical of Olivia's capabilities, now seemed the most thoughtful about the implications of what they had learned. It explains so much about her approach to teaching. The way she can manage difficult students, her crisis intervention techniques, her ability to break complex problems into manageable components. She's been applying elite tactical training to educational challenges. And it worked remarkably well, Chun pointed out. Her students show the highest improvement rates in critical thinking and analytical writing in the district. Military or not, she's an exceptional teacher. Inside the conference room, the discussion had shifted from immediate security concerns to the future implications of Olivia's compromised identity. Agent Foster had returned with preliminary identification of the neutralized operatives, confirming General Harrington's assessment of their connection to the Nexus network. We've matched facial recognition on the leader to suspected Nexus operations in 3 countries, Foster reported. This represents their first confirmed domestic infiltration attempt. The intelligence value of Captain Mitchell's intervention extends well beyond the immediate threat response. Principal Martinez looked between the federal agent and the general with growing concern. What does this mean for our school? Are our students still in danger? Enhanced security protocols are being implemented immediately, Harrington assured him. The specific threat has been neutralized, but the targeting of your institution suggests vulnerabilities that need to be addressed across educational facilities. And Miss Carr, Captain Mitchell's role in all this? Martinez asked. What happens to her now? The question brought the conversation back to the fundamental decision that Olivia now faced. Complete extraction from her current life or transition to a new role that acknowledged both her military background and her educational contributions. I believe Captain Mitchell is considering options that would allow her to continue contributing to educational security while acknowledging her specialized background, Harrington replied, deferring the specific answer to Olivia herself. All eyes turned to her, awaiting the decision that would define not just her future, but potentially the security approach of educational institutions across the country. Olivia considered the weight of this choice, balancing her desire for the quiet purpose she had found in teaching against the broader impact she could have in a role that utilized her full capabilities. I've spent 5 years hiding skills that could have helped protect educational communities more effectively, she said finally. Today demonstrated that those capabilities are sometimes necessary, even in environments we want to believe are separate from security concerns. If I can help develop protocols that better protect students and faculty while continuing to support educational objectives, that represents a more authentic integration of my complete skill set. The transformation in how Olivia's colleagues and students related to her was immediate and profound. When she emerged from the conference room after completing her debriefing with federal authorities, the atmosphere had changed completely from the casual educational dynamics that had existed just hours earlier. David Reynolds, who had spent months dismissing her pedagogical approaches, approached with an expression of deep respect. I owe you an apology that I'm not sure I can adequately express, he said quietly. I've been questioning your teaching methods when you've probably forgotten more about critical analysis than I'll ever know. Olivia regarded him with the same calm presence she had always maintained. David, you evaluated me based on the information you had available. That's not something that requires apology. But it is, Reynolds insisted. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on superficial assessments. I dismissed your insights, questioned your methods, and undermined your authority. Now, I find out you're a decorated special operations commander who's been applying elite tactical analysis to literary instruction. Rebecca Chun joined them, carrying student attendance reports that confirmed all learners had been successfully evacuated during the crisis. I keep thinking about all those classroom management techniques you shared with us. The way you handle difficult students, de-escalate conflicts, and maintain order in chaotic situations. Now I understand why you made it look so effortless. Olivia accepted the reports, reviewing them with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to all her tasks. The applications are different, but the principles remain consistent. Whether it's a classroom disruption or a tactical situation, the approach is similar. Assess the environment, identify behavioral patterns, implement appropriate interventions, and adapt as circumstances evolve. Mark Williams, who had been coordinating with security personnel to establish safe return protocols for students, approached with newfound professional respect. The tactical assessment techniques you showed us for literary analysis, breaking down narrative structures, identifying character motivations, evaluating multiple perspectives, those weren't just teaching methods, were they? That's how you were trained to analyze intelligence and operational scenarios. Cognitive frameworks transfer between applications, Olivia acknowledged. Critical thinking follows similar patterns whether you're analyzing The Great Gatsby or assessing potential security threats. The contexts change, but the analytical processes remain consistent. Catherine Simmons completed their impromptu faculty gathering, her typical authoritative manner replaced by genuine curiosity. All those times you helped struggling students develop more effective approaches to complex material. You were applying the same training methodologies used for elite military units, weren't you? Olivia nodded, recognizing that her colleagues were now seeing the connections between her military background and educational effectiveness. Elite training isn't about telling people what to think. It's about teaching them how to think under pressure. That principle works as well for helping students navigate difficult texts as it does for preparing operators to manage complex situations. As word spread throughout the school community about the events that had occurred, Olivia found herself navigating a transformed professional identity. Students who had known her only as their English teacher now regarded her with a mixture of awe and newfound appreciation, recognizing that the skills she had been teaching them had applications far beyond literary analysis. Emma Reeves, the sophomore class president who had questioned Olivia's deviation from evacuation protocols, approached her after classes resumed the following week. "Miss Carter, or should we call you Captain Mitchell now? I've been thinking about how you always told us that literature gives us frameworks for understanding complex situations. That wasn't just about books, was it?" Olivia considered the question thoughtfully. Literature provides us with models for understanding human behavior, ethical dilemmas, and decision-making under pressure. Those insights apply across different contexts, whether you're analyzing Atticus Finch's moral choices or making real-world decisions with significant consequences. "Is that why you became an English teacher after your military service?" Emma asked. "Because you saw the connection between tactical analysis and literary interpretation?" "Partly," Olivia acknowledged, "but also because literature allows us to explore human experiences from multiple perspectives. After years of operating in environments defined by conflict, I wanted to help young people develop the critical thinking skills that might create better alternatives to the situations I encountered." The transformation extended beyond individual interactions to the broader educational community. Olivia's unique combination of elite tactical training and educational expertise became the foundation for a new approach to school security that emphasized critical thinking, situational awareness, and adaptive response protocols rather than simply hardening physical facilities. The implementation of Olivia's vision for educational security began with a comprehensive assessment of vulnerabilities across learning environments. 6 weeks after the incident at Westridge High, she stood before an audience of educational administrators, security professionals, and government officials in a conference center in Washington, D.C., presenting findings that would transform how America protected its schools. Traditional security approaches focus primarily on hardening physical facilities, Olivia explained, her quiet teacher's demeanor now enhanced by the natural command presence she no longer needed to suppress. Cameras, locks, access controls. These are necessary components, but they address only the most obvious vulnerabilities while ignoring the human element that determines how effectively these systems function. On the projection screen behind her, security footage from various schools demonstrated the patterns she was describing: staff propping doors for convenience, students sharing access codes, visitors being waved through checkpoints without proper verification. The most sophisticated security technology becomes ineffective when human behavior undermines its implementation, she continued. Our assessment found that 78% of schools have security systems that are routinely compromised by everyday procedural shortcuts that participants don't recognize as creating vulnerabilities. Rebecca Chen, who had joined Olivia's team as Curriculum Development Coordinator for the National School Security Initiative, advanced the presentation to display classroom layouts and evacuation protocols from multiple institutions. Standard emergency procedures are designed for predictable scenarios with clear response patterns, Olivia noted, highlighting structural weaknesses in common approaches. But crisis situations rarely follow predictable patterns. When procedures fail to account for scenario variation, they create rigid response patterns that can increase vulnerability rather than enhance safety. General Harrington, seated in the front row, nodded with approval as Olivia demonstrated the tactical applications of her educational expertise. Her ability to translate complex security concepts into frameworks that educators could implement effectively represented exactly the integration of skill sets he had envisioned when offering her this position. The solution isn't more restrictive protocols or additional technology, Olivia emphasized, shifting to the core of her approach. It's developing critical thinking skills that allow educational professionals to assess situations, identify threats, adapt standard procedures when necessary, and implement appropriate responses based on specific circumstances rather than generic protocols. The presentation continued with case studies demonstrating how tactical assessment principles could be adapted for educational settings without militarizing learning environments. Olivia had developed a curriculum that taught threat recognition, situational awareness, and adaptive decision-making within frameworks that respected educational values and prioritized student well-being. We're not training teachers to become security personnel, she clarified. We're providing them with cognitive tools that enhance their ability to protect students while maintaining supportive learning environments. The goal is integration of security awareness into educational practice, not replacement of educational priorities with security objectives. As the presentation concluded, Secretary of Education Margaret Wilson approached the podium to address the assembled leaders. Captain Mitchell's approach represents a paradigm shift in how we conceptualize school safety. For too long, we've treated security and education as separate domains with competing priorities. This initiative demonstrates that the analytical frameworks that protect our nation can also enhance how we educate our children. The transition from concept to implementation moved with remarkable efficiency under Olivia's leadership. Within 3 months, pilot programs had been established in 37 school districts across 12 states. Rather than imposing standardized procedures, the initiative provided assessment frameworks that allowed each institution to develop customized approaches based on their specific environments, student populations, and community contexts. David Reynolds, who had transitioned from skeptical colleague to enthusiastic advocate, became a regional training coordinator for the Western states. His experience with Olivia's methods at Westridge High made him particularly effective at helping other veteran teachers recognize the value of integrating security awareness into educational practice. "This isn't about turning schools into fortresses or teachers into guards," he explained to a faculty group in Phoenix. "It's about developing the same critical thinking skills we teach our students: observation, analysis, adaptation, and applying them to create safer learning environments without sacrificing educational objectives." Catherine Simmons, whose administrative expertise had initially made her Olivia's most demanding critic, now headed curriculum integration efforts that ensured security concepts were presented in ways that aligned with educational values and pedagogical best practices. "The most effective security measures are those that enhance rather than disrupt the learning environment," she emphasized during professional development sessions. Captain Mitchell's approach succeeds because it treats security as an integrated component of educational practice rather than an imposed restriction. Mark Williams applied his coaching background to develop activity-based training modules that help students develop age-appropriate situational awareness without creating anxiety. His programs emphasized empowerment through knowledge rather than fear-based compliance with security rules. "We teach students to be observant, communicate effectively, and make good decisions," he explained to concerned parents. "These are life skills that enhance safety while supporting academic development and personal growth. The same awareness that helps them navigate potential security concerns also helps them succeed in classroom activities and social interactions." At the heart of this expanding initiative, Olivia continued teaching, not literature anymore, but the integrated application of tactical assessment principles to educational environments. Her classes combined the analytical rigor of her military background with the student-centered focus of her teaching experience, creating training experiences that transformed how educators approach their protective responsibilities. "Your greatest security asset isn't technology or procedures," she told each group of professionals she trained. "It's the human capacity for observation, analysis, and adaptive response. We're not replacing security systems. We're enhancing how humans interact with those systems to create truly secure learning environments." The impact of Olivia's approach became evident during an incident at Roosevelt Middle School in Chicago, where a teacher who had completed the initial training program identified behavioral indicators that signaled potential violence from a former student attempting to enter the building. Rather than following standard lockdown procedures that would have allowed the individual to remain on campus while emergency services responded, the teacher implemented an adaptive evacuation protocol that removed students from potential danger while security personnel contained the situation. "I recognized patterns that didn't align with normal visitor behavior," the teacher explained afterward. "Before this training, I would have simply followed our standard security protocol. But Captain Mitchell's program taught me to assess the specific situation and adapt our response based on actual conditions rather than generic procedures." Similar successes accumulated across participating districts, potential threats identified earlier, crisis situations managed more effectively, and perhaps most importantly, learning environments that maintained their educational character while incorporating appropriate security awareness. Secretary Wilson invited Olivia to the White House 6 months after the program's implementation to present initial outcomes to the President's Council on School Safety. The data showed significant improvements in threat prevention, emergency response effectiveness, and perhaps most surprisingly, educational outcomes in participating schools. "We're seeing an unexpected but logical connection between security awareness and academic performance," Olivia explained to the assembled officials. "The same critical thinking skills that enhance safety, observation, pattern recognition, analytical assessment also support stronger academic performance across subject areas." Students in participating schools show average improvements of 12% in standardized testing outcomes, with particularly strong gains in mathematics and science. The president leaned forward with evident interest. You're saying that teaching security awareness actually improves academic performance? The cognitive frameworks overlap significantly, Olivia confirmed. When we teach students and educators to be more observant, analyze situations effectively, and implement appropriate responses, those skills transfer naturally to academic contexts. Critical thinking is critical thinking, whether you're assessing a potential security concern or solving a complex math problem. This integration of security consciousness and educational excellence became the hallmark of what journalists were now calling the Mitchell approach, a methodology that enhanced safety without sacrificing the fundamental character of learning environments. As the program expanded nationally, Olivia found herself increasingly in the public eye, a position that contrasted sharply with the careful anonymity she had maintained during her years as an English teacher. Her background as both a decorated military commander and an effective educator made her uniquely positioned to bridge divides between security professionals and educational communities that had previously approached school safety from incompatible perspectives. 18 months after the incident at Westridge High, Olivia returned to campus for the dedication of the school's new Integrated Security and Learning Center, a facility designed according to principles she had developed, combining effective protection measures with enhanced educational capabilities. Students who had once known her only as their quiet English teacher now greeted her with a mixture of respect and affection that acknowledged both aspects of her identity. Emma Reeves, now a graduating senior preparing for studies in international relations, approached Olivia after the dedication ceremony. "I've been accepted to Georgetown's Security Studies program," she announced proudly. "Your recommendation letter probably helped, but honestly, it was watching you that day, how you protected us while staying completely focused and calm, that made me realize what I wanted to do with my life." Olivia smiled with genuine pride in her former student's accomplishment. "You were already developing those analytical skills long before you knew about my background. Your essay on moral complexity in To Kill a Mockingbird showed remarkable insight into how principles get tested under pressure." "That's what I finally understood about your teaching," Emma replied thoughtfully. "You were always training us to think critically and make decisions based on principles rather than rules. Whether it's analyzing literature or assessing security situations, the process is similar: observe carefully, recognize patterns, evaluate options, and act with purpose." This integration of seemingly disparate domains became the foundation for educational security frameworks that spread beyond American borders. 3 years after the Westridge incident, Olivia addressed an international conference on school safety in Geneva, presenting methodologies that had been successfully implemented in over 5,000 educational institutions across 14 countries. "Traditional approaches create a false dichotomy between security and education," she explained to representatives from diverse educational systems. "When we treat these as competing priorities, we either sacrifice learning environments to excessive security measures or leave educational communities vulnerable by prioritizing academic concerns over safety considerations." The screen behind her displayed the core principle that had guided her work: security through education, not instead of education. "The most effective protection comes from developing human capabilities rather than simply imposing restrictive measures," she continued. "When we teach observation, analysis, and adaptive response as integrated components of educational practice, we create environments that are simultaneously safer and more conducive to learning." General Harrington, who had traveled to Geneva to observe the international expansion of what had begun as a domestic security initiative, approached Olivia after her presentation. "I remember telling you that your educational work could be valuable in ways that didn't require hiding your capabilities," he recalled. "I underestimated just how transformative that integration would become." Olivia nodded, acknowledging both the journey and its outcomes. 5 years ago, I believed I had to choose between two identities, military commander or classroom teacher. What I've discovered is that the greatest impact comes not from separating those aspects of my experience, but from integrating them in service to something larger than either domain alone. The general studied her with evident pride in how far the initiative had developed. When we first discussed this position, I thought we were talking about teaching defensive tactics to educators. You've created something much more profound, a fundamental reconceptualization of how security and education relate to each other. Because they're not separate domains, Olivia explained simply. Both are about developing human potential to create better outcomes. Whether we're training elite units or teaching high school students, the core objective is the same: helping people develop the capabilities to navigate complex situations effectively. 4 years after her cover identity had been compromised at Westridge High, Olivia stood before a joint session of Congress, accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to educational security. As she looked out at the assembled legislators, she thought of the thousands of educators and millions of students whose learning environments had been transformed by approaches that integrated, rather than separated, security and educational objectives. This recognition belongs to every teacher who accepted the responsibility to protect their students without sacrificing their commitment to education, she said simply. To every educator who understood that awareness and knowledge are our most powerful protective tools. The audience rose in sustained applause, but Olivia's attention found her former colleagues from Westridge High in the gallery: David Reynolds, Rebecca Chen, Catherine Simmons, and Mark Williams had become leaders in their own right, spreading integrated security approaches throughout educational communities. General Harrington approached as the ceremony concluded. "Captain Mitchell, your training programs have now reached over 3 million educators worldwide. The methodologies you developed have transformed how we approach security in learning environments across 57 countries." Olivia nodded, understanding the true meaning of her journey. She had begun as a decorated commander trying to escape the shadows of combat operations through quiet service in a civilian classroom. Now, through the integration of her complete experience and capabilities, she had created something neither role could have achieved: independently, learning environments that were simultaneously safer and more effective because they recognized the fundamental connection between security awareness and educational excellence. Later that evening, Olivia returned to her office at the National Educational Security Institute and opened her laptop. The success stories continued to arrive. Emails from teachers who had used her methods to prevent potential threats, from administrators who had implemented her approaches to create more secure learning environments, from students whose educational experiences had been enhanced rather than compromised by integrated security awareness. She smiled, finally understanding that the incident that had exposed her identity 4 years ago hadn't ended her mission. It had expanded it beyond anything she could have imagined. The tactical skills she had once hidden beneath cardigans and lesson plans now served educational communities worldwide, protecting learning environments while enhancing their fundamental purpose. As Olivia reviewed reports from the latest implementation sites, she reflected on the lesson that had defined her journey. True security came not from hiding capabilities or separating different aspects of experience, but from integrating them in service to something greater than their individual applications. The skills that had once made her an elite commander now helped millions of educators protect their students while teaching them more effectively, creating a legacy of safety and learning that continued to expand with each new school that adopted her integrated approach. The story of Olivia Carter shows us that our greatest strengths often emerge when we stop hiding who we truly are and instead integrate our complete experiences in service to others. Her journey from concealing her capabilities to using them openly transformed not just her own life but educational communities worldwide. proving that sometimes our most valuable contributions come when we have the courage to bring our whole selves to the work that matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.